So, Donald Trump has been lashing out about the election. If you go on his Twitter feed, it is a litany of tweets attacking one person after the next, basically saying it's a fraud, it's a cheat. They're trying to steal the election from me. He got on election night or soon after and basically saying they're trying to steal it. And from that point on, and to be honest, even before, because if you remember, Donald Trump says the only way I can lose this election is if it's cheated from me. That's pretty convenient that that's the only way that you can lose an election. This is Donald Trump's Twitter feed. Look at this. In Detroit, there are far more votes than people. The great state of Michigan, the votes votes being far greater than the number of people. Oh, that's apparently a familiar lie for Trump. Here's another one. The Georgia recount is a joke and is being done under protests. You asked for a recount, Trump. They wouldn't let Republican poll watchers into the counting rooms. Unconstitutional. Basically, a torrent of lies and mistruths and basically falsehoods. He's a habitual liar who's basically lost a presidential contest and whose ego will not allow him to accept the fact that he's lost. It's a humiliation. Now, that doesn't mean that Donald Trump shouldn't go through his court proceedings. He should. He's given all sorts of money. He has all of these supporters. He's increased his support by 10 million votes. Those people are backing him for the same impetus that I was backing Sanders. Meaning, in the same way, I would want Sanders to be as full-throated as possible to push to the degree that he could push to try to win. Yes, I want him to do it ethically. Yes, I want him to be honest in the way that he goes about it. Meaning, I don't want him to lie about a race that he lost and said that he won it, but I want him to push if he believes that there's a potential to win it. So I don't have any issue with Donald Trump pushing his cases or pushing for the recounts. I think that's perfectly adequate and is what a candidate should do. But Trump upped the ante on this. And then upping the ante just made this constant torrent of attacks, despite the fact that he has nothing to show for it. Meaning it's one thing if you say, here's the litany of evidence that I have as president that kind of makes my point. That's not there. They're giving him his recounts. They're giving him his frivolous court cases. He's going to get those things. And when those things run out, he will be walked out of the office or escorted out of the office. Is there a potential for a loophole, for some kind of legal trickery where the Supreme Court gets involved? Look, those things are possible, I suppose. But this feels different than 2000, meaning this feels different than the Gore-Bush 2000 hanging Chad fiasco. This feels more like Trump is going to be escorted out at the end of this. But we'll see. Typically, the recounting of the votes don't find the 10,000 or the 100,000 votes he needs in the various states. So until something shows otherwise, Trump has lost this race. Here's the interesting part, though. Many Republicans have, in fact, more than half, believe that Donald Trump, quote unquote, rightfully won the race. Part of this, it seems to be coming from this idea of Donald Trump screaming bloody murder at the electoral system. That basically, I'm being cheated. And the people who are on Donald Trump's wavelength, so yeah, the guy's being cheated. Now, they may not go as far as Donald Trump goes with it. Meaning, they may not go to the point of saying everybody is against me, everybody's trying to cheat me, etc., etc. But they definitely have Republicans believe it was rigged and that Donald Trump, were it not for that rigging, would still be president of the United States come January. That's shocking and that's problematic. It's problematic because it goes to the idea of legitimacy in the office. You've heard me make this argument before that we're in this kind of weird race to the bottom where there's a tit for tat where one action justifies the other action of the opposition. And you get in this kind of, Chinese finger trap where neither side can extricate itself because the game space compels itself. I'm saying that the issue and the idea of America has gotten to the point where it matters less. That the actions of the political parties and the objectives of those political parties and the spoils matter more. Which means that if you have the American public that are in dire straits, you have a great part, millions of people that don't have jobs, that are at these food lines. I could show you that food line that went for miles, just cars, back after back after back. It's like they always say socialism creates food lines. Well, apparently capitalism does also. And what does your political space do? Diddly squat. $1,200. They let the loans, the money that was supposed to be given for stimulus to go up in smoke, and did so for political reasons. The public mattered less. Well, in this very specific situation, you have a discrediting of our system. And with that discrediting of the system, and people not being able to see legitimacy from a transparent basis, you get doubt. Yes, let him get his votes and everything else, but I think the idea that they're going to find enough votes to get Donald Trump over the finish line is ludicrous. But that kind of goes beside the point. Donald Trump has been attacking the electoral system remorselessly, but so did Democrats. And in the same way that Donald Trump attacks the electoral system now that he lost, Democrats did the same thing back in 2016. Instead of attacking it directly, though, Democrats went with the idea of the Russians. Trump is going with the idea that people in this country are out to get him. The polling, though, is giving this kind of interesting distinction based on rigged, or the term rigged. So I'll just read it. November 13th, 17th opinion polls showed that Trump's open defiance of Biden's victory in both the popular vote and the Electoral College appears to be affecting public's opinion or confidence in American democracy. Altogether, 73% of those polled agreed that Biden won the election, while 5% thought Trump won. So, right there, just straight and blunt, meaning what is reality? Who won this race? And by win, meaning who is the person who's identified from the, let's say, social norm as won the race? Biden, 73%. All right, let's keep going. That number is weird. That number should be higher, but they're both okay. 5% thought Trump won. But when asked specifically whether Biden had rightfully won, quote unquote, Republicans showed they were suspicious of how Biden's victory was obtained. 52% of Republicans said Trump had rightfully won the race, while only 29% said Biden had rightfully won. Isn't that amazing? So you would get 73% say, yeah, fair enough, we'll go with that. But then when you get to this notion of rightfully won, who actually won this race? The majority of Republicans, listening to Trump on that wavelength, gave it to Trump. Now, do they believe that deep down, or are they saying that in the same way they'll say Obama is a Muslim? I'm fascinated by this. And there's no way to kind of peer into them to know whether they're bullshitting you or not, and just kind of toeing the line for the president of the United States. That's scary. Because what that means is you have a segment of the population that will go along with this kind of soothing themselves with the idea that, he rightfully won and they somehow cheated him. That's amazing. That's amazing. That's disturbing. Asks why Republicans were much more concerned about the other states that were counters that had tipped the result towards Biden. 6 to 8% of Republicans said they were concerned that the election was, quote, unquote, rigged, while only 16% of Democrats and 1/3 of independents. Well, if you won, you're less concerned. No. Perfect race. Perfect. Spotless. Hey, you did great. Yeah, why would, with 16%, why would why would the winner be skeptical of the fact that they won? Independents being somewhere in between and can't make up their mind, they get a little bit higher, Republicans. But Republicans, 68%. 68%. That means that the overwhelming majority of an aspect of your country, millions, tens of millions of people, are doubtful of the electoral system. That electoral system that chooses and determines the sovereign. That is terrifying. That is terrifying. You understand that the idea in this country, in America, where you have this kind of peaceful transfer of power, where these guys might be at each other's throats, but that goes up to the waterline of America. And beyond that point, they stop. Meaning their boundaries, there's a rule set to which they ascribe to, and just based on norms, they don't go beyond those rule sets. Well, in this very specific instance, you have a large contingent of the population that no longer believes that the person who's being put in office deserves to be in office, and not just deserves to be, didn't legitimately win it. You must understand, the only reason that Donald Trump or Obama or any of these congressmen are getting into office, get salaries and everything from the state and everything else, and have a certain legitimacy to make decisions that are in representation of others or in the name of others, is because they were voted in. Voting in gives legitimacy. It's this kind of masses giving approval saying, yes, that's going to be the guy. Now, this is a corrupted process, right? It has all of the money that goes into shaping opinions and shaping perspectives, the attention that is given to a particular person versus sucked away from another person. All of those things matter in regards to a person getting elected. 90% of the races are won by the side with the most cash. So, despite the fact that you get a vote, if money matters that much, are you really getting a vote? Think of what I'm saying. It's almost like a senseless or it's almost like a forced choice. Almost not a choice at all. If 90% of the races are won by the side with the most cash, I don't even know who the candidates are. You can take away the other factors, just show me how much they're making. I'll say, that guy, I can choose it. 9 times out of 10, I'll hit it. And if that's true, when 90% of the races are chosen by the side with the most cash, does it matter from the standpoint of the fact that the public gets a choice, if that choice is already to some degree corralled? I guess the point I'm trying to make here, and that's somewhat of a tangent, the idea of legitimacy is given because these guys were put into that office. That's the point I'm trying to make. When you get to a point where 70, almost 80% of one of the groups, especially the opposition, no longer believes that the opponent won it legitimately, fairly, and squarely, you will run into problems, especially if that starts to harden. Meaning, if you start getting into this mindset where an aspect of your population no longer believes that the person who won the race, then the idea of sovereignty goes up in smoke. How can you be sovereign? How can you have legitimate rule over me when you didn't even win this contest legally and rightfully? Look, man, this is a disastrous poll. This is disastrous. And it's not the poll, of course, this is what it represents. Just to be clear, though, this is not specific to Republicans. In 2016, let's go back before that. When Obama was in office, and Obama goes with the idea of trying to get a Supreme Court picking, what happens? You have a situation where he picks Merrick Garland, milquetoast Merrick Garland, and the Republicans were willing to let the Supreme Court die on the vine and not let him get his pick. Obama, too cool for school, instead of moving heaven and earth and fighting like hell to get his pick, assumed that Hillary Clinton was going to win it. And when many of the other Republicans also assumed that Clinton was going to win it, they openly opined, maybe we don't need a Supreme Court. Maybe we don't need to put people on the court and on the bench. And what is the court going to do if we don't supply it with people to put on the bench? They're not going to do anything because they have no authority to do anything. They're just going to sit there and look crazy until they die off. Like, this was the shit that they were talking about when they thought, all right, we don't know if we could beat Clinton. And because we don't know if we could beat Clinton, we're going to, just not put in Garland. Well, Trump wins. Trump gets his 3 picks. And so whatever you want to think about Trump when you take him out in his 4 years, his legacy is going to be there for decades. Trump gets his picks, and what do the Democratic Party do? The Democratic Party comes out and screams, Russia. This is the exact same thing. The reason why I keep calling it Russiagate 2.0 is because when Democrats comes out and screams, Russia upset the results of this race, Hillary Clinton was supposed to win it, but Russia changed the results somehow and got Donald Trump in that office. Meaning Donald Trump wouldn't have won if it wasn't for the help of Vladimir Putin and the Russians. Again, undermining the result, undermining the victory itself. This person didn't win on their own steam. This person didn't win in a legitimate race. This person won because they cheated and they had help of a foreign adversary. The Democratic Party is more cautious about attacking the electoral system because they care a little bit more about this notion of the sovereign than a Republican does. And to be honest, even classical Republicans don't necessarily do that. Donald Trump is one of the first candidates I've ever seen attack the electoral system directly in this way, to trying to delegitimize it. He's not bright enough to understand the entirety of the consequences associated with damaging a system that chooses who decides. Beyond that point, I guess the point I'm trying to make here is the attack that Donald Trump is using on the electoral system was a similar attack that Democrats used against him and arguing about the Russians. Whether it's the Russians that undermining the democratic will of the public, or whether it's electors or people who are rigging the ballots that undermine the will of the public. In both scenarios, you have one aspect of the country or one of the parties in the country and the acolytes of the parties in the country that believing that the other guy got in office unfairly, unjustly, through cheating. If that gets worse, and you have parties that basically are so antagonistic because they believe anything is allowed, because that person is the epitome of all things bad, whether that's on the Democratic side or the Republican side, it's a race to the bottom. It's a race to the bottom. Democracy is far more fragile than I think people realize. And in a situation where the parties no longer can govern, where they're just at each other's throats, where nothing gets accomplished, where it's frivolous, nonsensical identity talk as opposed to actually real material concerns. When that becomes the standard, it's a death knell. It's a downward spiral. It's a failed state that doesn't necessarily know it's a failed state yet. In 2016, the Democratic Party did the exact same thing, and they acted the exact same way, meaning from the standpoint of the polling. Right here. Altogether, 53% of adults in the United States said they believed the November 3rd presidential election was legitimate and accurate, which is down 7 points from a poll shortly in 2016. Meaning in 2016, you had another drop where people thought this election was illegitimate. Let's see. In 2016, 52% of Democrats said Hillary Clinton lost to Trump was legitimate and accurate, even as reports emerged of Russians' attempt to interfere the outcome. This year, only 26% of Republicans said they thought Trump's loss was similarly legitimate. Oh, I see. But clearly the numbers changed. I mean, at one point the Democrats were at 16% saying, yeah, 16% believe it's great. Well, in 2016, that number was 52%. The point I'm trying to make here is Democrats, when their candidate lost, even though they might have accepted the results of the election, it was still a massive swing in regards to the number of Democrats that said this is a bogus election. Making the point that the Republicans doing it in similar terms. Yes, their numbers might be a bit more extreme, but not that much more extreme. And, look, democracy is more fragile than I think we realize. And I don't know how this mends. I don't know how, and maybe there is no mend. Maybe it's a collapse before things reconcile. But I strongly suspect that aspects of this, or a large aspect of this, is the economic sphere. You basically have people with less and less in more difficult straits. I mean, for God's sake, 42% of the American public lived off of $18,000 a year. Like, that's appalling. I mean, that's basically a poverty wage. And that's, like, poverty wages go above that. And you get nearly half of the country living off that. Well, what is your life living off of $18,000 a year? What are the things you have access to? If you get a parking ticket, that's an utter disaster. The food that you can eat or where you need to live. Like, these things are not positive situations. And the COVID situation is only going to make that situation worse. You have lessening resources. You have people being pissed off and hostile because of the situations to which they find themselves, in many respects, through no fault of their own. Yeah, you're going to have a more hostile world. especially when you have a political instrument that's gotten to the point where it no longer cares about the needs and concerns of the American public. Like I made the point before, yes, getting in office confers a certain degree of legitimacy, but if 90% of the races are won by the side with the most cash, then the determining factor is cash, not the individuals voting. They seem to be different things. Something needs to change. And I strongly suspect that that has to do with the economics and bringing down the hostilities of our society and, by and large, our world. I don't see that anytime soon. And I got to be honest, these numbers should be disturbing to pretty much anyone. Think of what that means going forward. I mean, what does that look like in 4 years or 8 years if this number continues to get worse and worse, where it gets that much more hardened and ingrained in the public that the electoral space is fraudulent, that the candidate that won didn't actually win, that there's some force or forces out there that is gaming and changing the system and the numbers. You have people who fervently believe it, flesh to bone. And as that number gets more and more ensconced, the activities and the behaviors of people will get more radical in response to it. Mark my words. Like, share, and of course, subscribe.